In 1990, only 3% of men said they had no close friends. Today, it's 15%, 5 times higher. And here's the strange part. Most of those men didn't have a big falling out with anyone. They didn't move across the country. They didn't suddenly become antisocial. Life just happened. Work got busy. Kids came along. People moved. Plans got postponed. And little by little, the people they used to talk to stopped being part of their everyday life. Nobody really notices it while it's happening, until one day, something good happens, or something bad happens, and you realize there's nobody you feel comfortable calling. If you're over 30, there's a good chance that sounds familiar. Think about the last time something happened in your life that you actually wanted to talk about. Not a crisis, not some life-changing event, just something. Maybe you got good news. Maybe you had a rough week. Maybe something happened and your first instinct was to tell somebody. Who came to mind? For a lot of men, the honest answer is nobody. Or maybe one person, a partner. And even then, you probably said less than you really wanted to. There was a guy online who wrote something that stuck with me. He said he realized he hadn't had a real conversation with another man in more than 2 years. Not a quick catch-up, not talking about work, not talking about sports. A real conversation. The kind where you actually say what's going on. And what surprised me wasn't the post. It was the replies. Hundreds of men basically saying the same thing. Yeah, same here. I didn't realize it until I read this. That's the strange thing about this kind of loneliness. It doesn't feel dramatic. It doesn't feel like a problem. Most of the time, it just feels normal. Which is exactly why so many men never notice it happening. So how common is this really? More common than most people think. In 2021, researchers asked American men about their friendships. 15% said they had no close friends at all. Back in 1990, that number was just 3%. Think about that. In 30 years, the number of men with no close friends didn't double, it didn't triple, it became 5 times higher. And it's not just about friendships. A Pew Research study found that nearly 3/4 of men rely on one person for emotional support. One person, usually a partner. Which means if that relationship ends, or even goes through a difficult period, a lot of men suddenly realize they don't really have anyone else to lean on. Not because they did something wrong, not because they pushed people away. Most of the time, life just got busy. Work happened, kids happened, people moved, and little by little, their world got smaller. You can actually see this in everyday life. A lot of men still have people around them, coworkers, neighbors, people they talk to every week. But very few people they'd call at 11 o'clock at night if something really went wrong. And then there's another number. This one surprised me. Researchers asked men between 18 and 23 years old a simple question. Do you feel like anyone truly knows you? 2/3 said no. 2/3. These aren't men in their 40s. They aren't divorced. They aren't retired. They're just getting started. And already, most of them feel unseen. Which tells us something important. This isn't just a middle-age problem. And it doesn't seem to be getting better. If anything, it may be starting earlier than ever. So the real question is, why? Why does this keep happening to so many men who never expected it and never wanted it? There are a few reasons this happens, and none of them are what most people expect. The first one is surprisingly simple. It's about structure. Think back to the period of your life when making friends felt easy. School, college, maybe your first job. You weren't sitting there thinking, I need to build a social circle. You were just around the same people, every day, week after week, month after month. And there's actually a name for this. Psychologists call it proximity. The idea is simple. The more time people spend around each other, the more likely they are to become close. Most of us didn't choose our school friends. We just ended up sitting next to them long enough. But somewhere in your late 20s or early 30s, that structure disappears. Nobody automatically puts you around the same people anymore. Work is different. Everyone's busy. Everyone's tired. And suddenly, making a friend takes effort. You have to reach out, make plans, follow up. And a lot of men never really learned how to do that. The second reason has to do with how men usually connect. Researchers have noticed something interesting. Men often build closeness through shared activities, doing things together, working on something, playing a sport, being side by side, not necessarily sitting face to face talking for hours. And that works surprisingly well, as long as the activity is still there. But once the activity disappears, the connection often starts to fade too. The gym buddy you stopped seeing after your schedule changed. The coworker who left the company. The friend you used to see every Sunday until life got busy. Sometimes nobody decides to end the friendship. The thing that brought you together just disappears. And without it, the friendship slowly fades with it. And then there's the third reason. This one is harder to talk about. Somewhere along the way, a lot of men learned that needing people feels uncomfortable. Not because someone sat them down and taught them that. It's usually much smaller than that. A kid gets laughed at. A teenager opens up and regrets it. An adult learns that asking for support makes him feel weak. So over time, a lot of men stop reaching out. Not because they don't want connection, but because reaching out starts to feel risky. And the longer that goes on, the harder it becomes to change. So now all three things are happening at once. The structure that used to create friendships is gone. The activities that held friendships together start to disappear. And reaching out feels harder than it should. None of this happens overnight. Nobody wakes up one morning and realizes they've become lonely. It happens slowly, quietly. One missed call, one canceled plan, one busy year, and then another. Until one day, you look around and realize something important has been missing for a long time. Here's something most people don't realize. This hasn't always been the way it is. Not that long ago, most men had something built into their lives that made connection easier. Local clubs, church groups, unions, community organizations, places where the same people showed up every week, not to talk about their feelings, not for self-improvement, just to be around other people, to work on something, build something, organize something, or simply spend time together. And that's more important than it sounds, because friendships rarely appear out of nowhere. They usually grow out of repeated contact, seeing the same faces, having the same routines, being part of the same group. For most of the 20th century, a lot of men had that built into everyday life. Then, slowly, it started to disappear. Harvard sociologist Robert Putnam spent years studying this, and what he found was pretty clear. Participation in community groups and local organizations dropped dramatically over time. The bowling leagues, the local clubs, the neighborhood associations, the places people used to show up without having to think about it. They didn't disappear overnight. Life just changed. People got busier. Television became entertainment. Then the internet arrived. And at some point, staying home became easier than showing up. And while that was happening, something else changed too. For a long time, the message many men absorbed was pretty simple. Handle it yourself. Don't need too much. Don't depend on anyone. Be self-sufficient. At first glance, that sounds like strength. But there's a problem with it. Human beings aren't built to do everything alone. Nobody is. The issue is that a lot of men learn to see connection as something optional, something nice to have, not something they actually needed. And that changes the way you live. Not just how you behave, but how you see yourself when you need support. So what happened isn't really complicated. The structures faded, the culture shifted, and millions of men were left to figure out friendship on their own, without much guidance, and without many examples. That's a lot to carry. And the strange thing is, most men don't even realize they're carrying it. So what do you actually do with all of this? Because understanding the problem is one thing, living with it is something else. And before anything else, it's worth saying this. There's no quick fix here. No weekend reset, no 5-step plan. Most friendships aren't built in a day, and they don't come back in a day either. But there are a few things that seem to help. The first one is surprisingly simple. Think of one person you've lost touch with. Not your best friend, not the perfect person, just someone you genuinely wouldn't mind seeing again. And instead of saying, "We should catch up sometime," try being specific. Tuesday, Thursday, coffee, lunch, a walk, anything. Because one of the strange things about adult friendships is that most people are waiting to hear from someone, waiting for someone else to make the first move, which means both people wait and nothing happens. The second thing is less about friendship and more about environment. Most friendships don't start with deep conversations. They start with repeated contact, seeing the same people, being in the same place, sharing the same routine, which is why activities matter more than most people realize. A gym class, a running group, a sports league, a volunteer project. It doesn't really matter what it is. What matters is that it happens again next week, and the week after that, because that's how familiarity turns into connection. And then there's the hardest one. Lower the bar for honesty. Not dramatically, not all at once, just a little. A lot of men assume a real conversation has to be some huge emotional moment. Usually it isn't. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, "Honestly, it's been a rough week," or "I've been thinking about this a lot lately," or even, "I'm not really sure what I'm doing with this." Small things, nothing dramatic, just enough for another person to see what's actually going on. Because connection rarely appears all at once. Most of the time, it starts with a small signal, something that tells another person, "I'm here too." And sometimes, that's enough. Here's the thing that stays with me about all of this. Most men aren't lonely because they failed. They're not lonely because they made some terrible mistake. Most of the time, life just happened. Work happened. Relationships happened. Kids happened. Years passed. And nobody really told them that friendships need attention too. That they don't just take care of themselves forever. And the fact that so many men carry this quietly, without talking about it, doesn't mean there's something wrong with them. It might just mean that something important slowly slipped out of focus, and nobody noticed until it was already gone. The hidden load isn't always something dramatic. Sometimes it's much smaller than that. Sometimes it's just carrying the same thing for years, without realizing how heavy it's become. If any part of this felt familiar, I'd genuinely be curious to hear about it. What does this look like in your life?